The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to All You Can Eat. It is the podcast about deliciousness. I am your host, Rob Rosenthal, coming to you live, actually, from Miami Beach, Florida, where it continues to be pleasant in spite of the fact that we are midwinter. And midwinter means, middle of February, and it is, generally speaking, in a lot of places, kind of cold and damp and, challenging. But it does make today's subject that much more relevant. In fact, it's the reason behind today's subject, which is midwinter comfort foods. I was inspired by the fact that I am about to teach another class over the next week at this time, through New York's 92nd Street Y, terrific institution in New York City, New York, that has continuing education programs, and I teach periodically on the subject of food and cooking. Next week's class, in fact, is Midwinter Comfort Foods, because here we are, as I said, in the weather that kind of makes you crave, if you will, foods that give you warmth and comfort. And so I thought it would be a good idea to spend this evening's program, episode number 122 of All You Can Eat, discussing comfort food, what it is, and more importantly, you know how to make it. So it's funny because comfort food is a definite thing. Like if you look it up, you will find a definition for it, right? It's the food that provides nostalgic or sentimental value to someone and may be characterized, this is pretty funny, by its high caloric nature, high carbohydrate level, or simple preparation. The nostalgia may be specific to an individual, or it may apply to a specific culture, which led me to look further into it, right? Because, what's one person's comfort food is not another. We all have different comfort foods. I'm going to turn that off. It happens periodically because when I do go live, it's inevitable that there'll be some technical screw-up, or not that that's the most giant screw-up, but my phone, let me see if I can turn off the sound. Okay, good, that's done. But I was saying about comfort food, one person's comfort food is not another. I don't even know. Like if somebody said to me, hey, what's your kind of comfort food? Believe it or not, the first thing that comes to mind to me is a slice of New York pizza. Because I spent an awful lot of time in my life traveling internationally for business, and I remember vividly that every time I would come back into the United States, the first thing I wanted when I got back home was a slice of pizza. That was my kind of welcome back into my experience. The term comfort food has been traced back at least to 1966, when the Palm Beach Post used it in a story. Quote, adults, when under severe emotional stress, turn to what could be called comfort food associated with the security of childhood, like mother's poached egg or famous chicken soup. Okay, look, I've never heard anybody say that a poached egg for them was comfort food, although I can relate to eggs, because there's something for me about scrambled eggs that are comforting. But if you kind of look up comfort food and you look it up from the standpoint of, culture, different cultures have different tastes, it's fun for me because if you look, for example, in, and this is all like listed out here, but like Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, that part of the world, you see things like even there, chicken soup shows up. Butterscotch apple dumplings show up. Potato wedges, meat pies. If you go into Canada, the butter tart. They like, what else do they like up there in Canada that's interesting to me? Well, again, we're going to get to mac and cheese because that seems to be consistent in North America. Let's go to England. What's comfort food in England? Bangers and mash, which is sausages with mashed potatoes. A bacon buddy, which is a bacon sandwich. Sticky puddings, like sticky toffee pudding, of course. That sounds very good to me. What else do they like? They like toast with baked beans on it. Go figure that carbohydrate mess out. Pies, the steak and kidney pie. They like their mashed potatoes. They like fish and chips, of course. What else? France. I'm interested in knowing what the comfort foods in France are because those people know how to eat. Creme caramel, lovely custardy dessert. French onion soup. Again, we're going to find a lot of soups on these lists. That seems to be kind of an obvious comfort food. Gratin dauphinois, potato slices baked with cream and stuffed tomatoes. The Germans like, actually all these are kind of in German, so it's hard to tell what they are, but you can see Frankfurter written in there and sausages are in there somewhere. The Greek people, pastisio, which is their kind of like layered dish with pasta, meat, cheese, as if their version, I suppose you could say, of, well, I don't know. Then you have the moussaka, and you go to Hong Kong, baked pork chop rice. If we go into India, you're going to find the samosas, those lovely little things, biryani, which is a rice dish. You see a lot of that. And then you look in Japan, you see, well, they have curry, they have ramen, they have miso, they have mochi, those little rice cakes, lovely. I think, though, when I look at this list of different comfort foods from around the world, I would be most happy in Italy because here are the pizzas. Here are the 6 comfort foods. If you go into Wikipedia, comfort foods, and you look at the list in Italy, here's you go. You go gnocchi, those small dumplings, right? You have lasagna. You have pasta alla amatriciana and pasta alla carbonara, both fantastic pasta dishes with guanciale, which is the pork cheek. And then you have a pizza, which I already mentioned, is number 1 on my list. And then in Italy, Nutella shows up, or as I like to think of it, the crack cocaine of the kitchen. Love that. It's kind of similar. Their Nutella, which is chocolate hazelnuts bread, is like, in America, we take comfort with peanut butter. Puerto Rico, arroz con gandules, rice with pigeon peas. So arroz con pollo. So you're going to find rice dishes. You're going to find things like mofongo, which is mashed kind of plantains and that kind of thing, and tostones, which are also kind of fried plantain slices. The Spanish people like their churros, those kind of long fried donuts that you would dip in hot chocolate and a nice paella. Again, rice is in the thing here. And then you come to the United States of America, and I will report on a few of the things that we Americans like as comfort food. There is apple pie. There is beef stew, which, that makes some sense. Biscuits and gravy. People like casserole, chicken dumplings, chicken soup, of course, shows up again. Chili. Then you have your chowders, French fries, cornbread, fried chicken, of course, cupcakes. Nobody's going to argue with that. Some grilled cheese sandwich, especially one with tomato soup. Ice cream, obviously. I shouldn't say obviously. And then you have the number 1. I mean, there's peanut butter, which I mentioned. Pizza's on the list. Pot roast, which I'm going to be talking to you about in a little bit. It says tuna casserole. I don't know. I mean, I actually have some room on my list for... tuna salad. It depends. I mean, some people might like egg salad. Some people might just despise all of that stuff. But I could see that. And then, of course, you have the big one, and they have meatloaf here as well, and mashed potatoes, but mac and cheese. Because mac and cheese is essentially showing up as comfort food, kind of in this. I would say if I had to pick, like, what's the most comforting comfort food that there is? You see it all the time everywhere, and somehow it's that mac and cheese, right? Carbohydrates, fatty, gooey, tasty, just, yummy deliciousness. So that's kind of the backgrounder on comfort foods. And again, like I said, we all have our own, and everybody has something different. So when I do the class next week on midwinter comfort foods, I decided I would do a couple of different things. One is I'm going to demonstrate how to do some soups, because I feel like, especially in the middle of the winter, sometimes you just want to sit down with a big old bowl of hot soup. Obviously, chicken soup is a big one. And if you're in the Northeast, you like a nice chowder. Anywhere that you go, I don't have to tell you how popular a nice slurpy kind of ramen would be. I'm going to focus on a couple of them, which fall into my kind of sweet spot for cooking, which is that I always like to get like the most taste with the fewest ingredients and the least effort. That is literally my formula. So I'm going to show how to make a potato leek soup, which requires 3 ingredients if you count water as one of them. Literally, it is potatoes and leeks, and you could make that with water. And you have a really easy to make and stunningly delicious soup. I love that. I also frankly like a good pea soup, and one of the great things about pea soup, 4 ingredients now, maybe 5, is that pea soup can be made with frozen peas, and I always make it with frozen peas. It's not that fresh peas would be wrong or bad, but fresh peas don't come around that often, and they are not required to make an awesomely delicious pea soup. You need a bag or 2 of those lovely frozen peas and a few other ingredients to bring that together. Delicious soup. And then I think I am going to do a demonstration on braising, which is a technique in cooking that uses warm moisture. It uses liquid, and you braise food in liquid. And every culture, by the way, every culture around the world will use braising for its version of something. Here in our country, some of the most famous ones are brisket. So I'm going to do a little brisket demonstration, which requires braising. You can also, instead of putting in a piece of meat to braise, you can make that with short ribs, and then you have braised short ribs of beef, which is awesome. And I might even discuss in the class something like a stew. And again, that could be anything from, like, if you're a vegetarian type of vegan type, a vegetable stew would be fine. Or you can always add anything into that, any kind of protein into it to make something interesting. I read about a shrimp and bean stew the other day that I thought looked really good to me. And if the question is, well, what's the difference between a soup and a stew? It basically comes down to liquid, right? Because in a soup you have it's a lot more liquidy. In a stew, that is, you have less liquid and you have a creamier, thicker texture. That's the fundamental difference. And I don't know that we'll have time today, but if we do, there is another dish that I have spoken about here before on the program that I'm deeply in love with. And it could also be characterized as an ideal midwinter comfort food, and it is oatmeal. But I make my oatmeal in an unusual way, because while most people will enjoy oatmeal that's a little bit sweet, with some brown sugar or honey, or however you do that, and then you top it with maybe some nuts or raisins or fruit, whatever you like or not. I actually make my oatmeal in the savory style, which is to say that I use herbs and I use spices and I use condiments to make something that is not as much of a breakfast item per se, but one that you could have any time, and I really love it. So that is today's program, my friends. We're going to start off with some soup making, move into a little bit of braised brisket, and then see what else we have time for. Hang right in. So I mentioned the potato leek soup, which I don't think I had. It certainly couldn't be considered a comfort food for me because I never had it growing up. In fact, I wasn't even really familiar with it until I went to French cooking school. And part of the reason they have you make things, certain dishes, in this case potato leek soup, is because you have to actually practice cleaning and cutting leeks and peeling potatoes and cutting those. But it's also a lovely dish that the French make, and of course they always make it sound sexier than potato leek soup. It's called potage parmentier. And what I said I like so much about it, and I do, is that you need virtually 2 ingredients, right? You're going to get yourself some nice Idaho russet potatoes, and you peel them and you cut them into chunks. And then you're going to buy a couple of leeks. And I guess that's why I didn't really have it growing up, because I don't remember ever seeing a leek until I went to cooking school. Tall, green vegetable that comes out of the ground, obviously a little bit dirty at the top because it grows right through the dirt. And they're tall and they're green. They're from that same family as onions. They're just more, they're, I was going to say more delicious. I mean, again, that's subjective, but they are great. They get really beautiful when you cook them, like mellow and sweet and soft and a beautiful texture. And the only thing about making a potato leek soup that is at all challenging is the cleaning of the leek, which, if you think about it, shouldn't be that hard. You're going to cut off really kind of like the hard green part at the top of the leek. You're really here for the rest of the leek. The top part of it that's kind of hard and green also tends to be where most of the dirt is. So you cut that off and you slice the leek vertically, maybe halfway, maybe like down the middle, and then down the other middle. Like, you want to be able to fan out the top and thereby get out all of the any kind of dirt or anything that you see in the top part of the leek. You want to put that under water that is spraying, or soak it or whatever. And it's important, obviously, because the last thing that you want in anything that you eat is any type of sand or anything that gives you that kind of grainy, horrible sense that you're having, sand in your mouth. So you clean the leek and then you slice it into, or dice it into little tiny, small pieces. You peel the potato, as I said, and you cut that into small pieces, and literally it goes into a soup pot. And all you have to do is kind of cover it, and all you really have to do is cover it with water. I know that it would not be a problem to use a vegetable broth or a vegetable stock or a chicken broth. You don't have to. And so you just cook that up and you simmer it for 20, 25 minutes until it's all soft and cooked out. And it's going to need salt. That is crucial. You can certainly twist in any kind of pepper that you want. And now comes the time in that soup where you will simply blend it. And that blending can happen with, in a blender. You can do it in a food processor. If you can use a stick blender, if you know what that is, and you have one of those. Certainly a very handy device in any kitchen. You can get those for like $25 online. And you just stick a stick blender into the pot and you blend it all up until it's smooth, because potato leek soup is intended to be, creamy in that way without the use of cream. And then you taste it for seasoning, and if you're happy with it, you're good to go. And if it needs to thicken more, you can cook it more. And that's all you really need to make a delicious potato leek soup. Now, I will say 2 things. One is a caution. If you happen to blend your soup in a blender, remember that hot liquid in a blender can be dangerous when you turn that blender on. And the only way to deal with that is to take off the little kind of plastic piece of the lid of the blender, thereby allowing kind of hot air to escape rather than being trapped and erupt like a volcano. And then you just cover that with a kitchen towel, so that way when you do blend, there's not pressure building up as if it were a pressure cooker, because you don't want hot liquid shooting out of there on your face. The other thing I can tell you also about the soup, the potato leek soup, is I oftentimes save the rind that I have from cheese. So, for example, if I buy some Parmesan Reggiano, which is an amazingly great cheese, and you don't eat the rind, I save the rind anyway. And so when my potato leek soup is on the stove cooking, I put in I let it cook with the Parmesan rind in there as well, because that brings a flavor to it. When you serve your potato leek soup, hot, delicious, simple, you can serve it as is. You could top it with a little bit of olive oil. You could top it with whatever is exciting to you, maybe a sprinkle of whatever your favorite herb is. You can, I find, sometimes I like a little crunch, and I find that you can go into these stores these days, like the Trader Joe's and whatever, and find crunchy, like little crunchy, onion or shallots, or little crunchy bits, so whatever. But I love the soup, and as I said, easy to make. A couple of ingredients. You're cooking for 20-25 minutes. You're blending. You're adding salt. You've got yourself potato leek soup. Now, another soup that I make with some regularity is pea soup. I love pea soup. My version is simple, vegetarian, and I suppose, again, kind of adaptable in the sense that you can put a little something else on top of that if you want to. And as I had mentioned earlier, the beauty of pea soup is quite simply that you use frozen peas because they're good. You go in and get those in the market. You bring those back, and the basis for this soup, for the pea soup, and for many other soups, is what the French call mirepoix, which is very simply the combination of diced up carrot, onion, and celery. So let's say, for argument's sake, just quantity-wise, we had 2 carrot sticks, and we had 2 sticks of celery, and we had 1 medium-sized onion, and we dice it all up as fine as we can dice. And we put that into a stock pot or in a soup pot, and we put a little olive oil in there, and we cook it up for a couple of minutes. What they call sweating. That's the technique where you allow those 3 veg, the mirepoix, carrot, celery, and onion, to cook for a couple of minutes. They start to smell good. They start to soften a little bit. And they start to release a little bit of flavor. That's what the point of the sweating is. We're going to create a little bit of flavor. We're not looking to color. We're not looking for the onions to turn color. In fact, we want them, in sweating, just to soften a little bit, to become a little bit more translucent. And the carrots soften a little bit. And then the celery softens a little bit. It's a beautiful flavor combination. It's a base for not only this soup, but many others. Because while I'm going to tell you how to make pea soup, if we didn't put in peas at this point, when we have that lovely sweated mirepoix, we could put in lentils and make lentil soup. And what I'll say, even before I revert back to the pea soup, is that one of the things that makes soup making these days so easy is that most supermarkets these days are doing the work for you. I mean, you can go in and buy pre-minced mirepoix, like a container that is filled with chopped up carrot, celery, and onion. And then all you do is you dump it, like literally. I mean, how much easier can that be? You take that, you sweat it for a couple of minutes. It smells good. The onions are getting a little translucent. You drop in a little salt and pepper at this stage because you want those to taste good. We're going to drop in the salt and pepper sometimes at every stage. A little bit in there. We toss it around. And when the time comes, we dump in, let's call it a bag or 2 apiece, depending on how big that bag is. And that's it. On top of that, you could go water. But I tell you, in this one, I like the added flavor of adding in some stock. So you could go water, you could go vegetable stock, you could go chicken broth as an example. I do a combination. I'll do like half chicken, half water as an example. But you can go any one of them. It's just liquid at this point that you're putting in, covering up your peas and veg. And again, bring it to a boil, turn it down to a simmer for 20-25 minutes, and add in some salt. And now you're ready to blend. Whether it's the stick blender, whether it is the Cuisinart thing, the food processor, whether or not it is the regular blender, you're going to blend till smooth, and you have, my friends, what we would call pea soup, or what the French would make more interesting by calling petit de pois. It is a potage de petit pois, so a pea soup. And again, as a topping, again, whatever you want. I mean, maybe nothing. Maybe a couple of shreds of tarragon, fresh tarragon, which goes beautifully with peas. Maybe you put it on top of that, whatever you like. You like bacon bits, put that on. You want a little bit of grated cheese on that thing, or on your, that's always fine. You want those crunchy little bits of, fried onions, or fried leeks, or fried shallot, anything, that's good on top of that. Or it's just simply good as it is. Some people will even put a little dollop of, sour cream or creme fraiche on their pea soup. Lovely, delicious, fine. And the only difference between that and the next one I'm going to tell you, the lentil soup, is that you just switch out the peas for the lentils. And again, you don't have to, I'm too, again, my process is, how can I keep this simple and not do, I don't even you can get fresh lentils, and you can go through the process with the lentils of cleaning them and straining them, make sure everything is good. But again, Trader Joe's is basically selling you a bag of lentils at this point that have already pretty much been taken care of. They really don't even need to cook for that long. I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, they're already cooked. But they make a perfectly good, a delicious lentil soup on top of the mirepoix, which you can either, again, make yourself or buy pre-made in a lot of the markets these days. Now, for what it's worth, I mean, maybe it's worth something, otherwise I wouldn't be mentioning it, but as we speak, I'm coming to you from the kitchen, and I'm making a vegetable soup. And the reason is because it's kind of, even here in Miami Beach, it's a little bit it's soup day. There's no sun, there's just a little bit of a breeze, the weather is cooler than it normally is, and I happen to have the ingredients. And what are the ingredients? Well, I have, a little bit of onion, and a little bit of carrot. I don't have celery, but that's fine, I'm working without that. And I have vegetables that are roasting in the oven. That includes some sweet potato that I found. I'm going to roast up some squash, and I happen to have had a couple of zucchinis, so those are being roasted. And why roast? Because I get more flavor. I have a bag of collard greens that I had picked up from the supermarket. Great. I have some onion and shallot. So I mentioned the onion, but I have shallot and garlic, so I'm going to get those into the base, into the flavor base. And then I have some, I have some chicken stock. There's a few herbs floating around, which I can also throw into there. And the point of the story is that soup making is not complicated and can be made pretty much with whatever ingredients you have on hand. That is the beauty of soup. It is great in the middle of the winter. It is easy to make. It's delicious, and it is also a comfort food. Now let's turn our attention to braising, and get into braising some brisket. Now, I'm going to try to lay this out in as visual a way as possible. The braising is cooking with wet heat, and you can do it on top of the stove, and you can do it as well in a pot in the oven. You can do it in a stock pot. You can do it in, what they call a braiser. I mean, it's basically you're using a vessel that's large enough to hold your protein, generally speaking, although you can braise, vegetables. But let's say you're braising a piece of meat or short ribs or brisket, as we were talking about, and then there's gonna be the aromatic vegetables that go into it and whatever else you put in, and you have to put in a bunch of liquid because it's cooking in liquid, and that's the idea of the wet heat. It's not fully submerged. That's important to know. We're not covering the food so much, but we're covering half to 2/3 of the food. So the liquid comes half to 2/3 up the way of the pot. And it's probably my favorite cooking method because everything is done in one pot. Because the results are always spectacular, because you can take There's another advantage. You can take any kind of cut of meat, even the less expensive cuts of meat. And when you braise them, they get to, falling off the bone, right? So when I had said earlier that every culture has like their braise, the Chinese will braise, pork in like a red sauce that they make. The French do braises obviously all the time. That's where I learned the technique, braised beef, and they're famous. Whatever. There's a ton of great French dishes, but Italy, ossobuco is where you're braising shanks of veal and that kind of thing. So the thing about braising is that you're doing it in one pot, and it not expensive cuts of meat, and you end up falling off the bone, soft, succulent meat. It creates its own gravy. Just everything about it is good. And from a technique standpoint, there's really only a couple of essential things that one needs to know. Because I'm going to take you through the making of a brisket, whether it's brisket or whether it's short ribs of beef, or if we were braising chicken as an example, the first step is always to get a little bit of sear, if you will, a little bit of color on the protein that we're using. And even before, I guess there is one step before the sear, but even before we get to the sear, we want to season the meat that we're using. And season here will means essentially salt and pepper. So if we were going to start a braise of chicken, we would salt and pepper both sides of the chicken, and we would start, and we would maybe put a little bit of oil or lubrication in the bottom of a thick pot, really. And then we would put our skin side down, as an example, and we'd get medium-high heat, and we'd get some color on that chicken. Believe it or not, once that chicken has color, we take it right out of that pan. We make sure that we don't burn what has developed in the bottom of the pan, because that's the key. Those things that develop down there, those brown bits, they have a lot of names. Fond, that's what the French would call it, glaze. To me, the only name that matters is flavor bombs. Those part of the reason that we're searing our protein is because it brings more flavor. Anytime you brown, you're going to bring more flavor to it. And also because we want what collects in the bottom of the pot. That's a basis for a lot of flavor for us. But I had said brisket, so if you get a nice piece of brisket, raw, obviously, and you salt and pepper both sides, another thing that I do with brisket is I start it with thin slices of garlic, which simply means that you take a garlic clove or two, you slice it thin, then take the sharp point of a big old knife and stab a couple of holes into your piece of brisket, and in each hole that you stab, stick in a slice of garlic. Doesn't that sound good? Garlic, salt, pepper, and now I'm going to put a pan on the heat on top of the stove, a big old kind of, those, who makes those, the big, beautiful Le Creuset. Oh, man, those are great. Anyway, you get a big pot on top of the stove, put your heat on, medium, high, put some lubrication in the bottom of the pan, which is to say some oil. It doesn't have to be olive. It can be neutral, like grapeseed or canola. And now the first step is we are going to sear our brisket, which simply means that we're putting in one side dry. Oh, by the way, I meant to tell you, if you're going to sear, you make sure that brisket has no moisture on it. Dry it with paper towels, salt, pepper, studded with garlic, hot oil in the pot. The meat goes in, and we just let it sit there for a few minutes until we take our tongs and take a peek, and we go, oh yeah, I'm getting some nice color on that thing. Great. Then turn it over on the other side and do the same thing. And let's make sure that we control the heat so that we don't burn the browning that we're beginning to see at the bottom of the pan. Then when both sides of the protein are sufficiently colored, you look at it and you go, that looks pretty good. That's a nice brown kind of crustiness. Take the meat out of the pan and replace it with your mirepoix. Now, as I mentioned to you before, that's onion, that's celery, that's carrot, that are pretty finely diced, right? So that would go in the pan at this point, and it would get stirred around a little bit because we now want to start to pick up some of those brown bits in the bottom of the pan. And we can, because the carrot, celery, onion will release moisture. Now, I want to make it clear, I don't actually use a mirepoix with my brisket. You certainly could. It'd be yummy. I go onions only, and I go a lot of them. Well, what's a lot of onions? Okay, I have browned off a pretty, seared off to brown, a pretty nice sized piece of brisket. The bottom of my pan is looking good right now because it's got some brown bits in it. I may need or not need to add a little bit more lubrication in there, a little bit more oil or fat in there if it looks too dry, but I'm going in with onions. To be honest, I'm going in with a lot of onions. I mean, 6 onions I could go in there with at this point that I have sliced, and I'm stirring them around, and now's when I'm going to know. Are they going to release enough liquid so that I don't need to add any more oil, or if I do, what's the big deal? I throw in a little shot of oil and sweat those onions down. Again, here, I am not looking for color. I'm looking for, we're going to start to soften them. They're going to smell beautiful. They're going to reduce in size. They're reducing in size because they're releasing moisture. The moisture is being released into the bottom of the pan. That's helping you deglaze, which is to say, scoop up all of that brown bits, which now are becoming part of the flavor base of your briskety braise. I would touch, at this point, I would put in a little touch of salt and pepper because I want the onions to taste good. And when the onions have been sweat, what are we looking at? 5 minutes, Rob? Yes. Sure. They're soft. They've reduced in size. They smell fantastic. And at this point, guess what goes back into the pot? That old chunk of meat that you had browned off before now goes in there. And the only thing you really need at this point, when I say the only thing you need at this point, it's enough liquid to braise the meat, which can go halfway up to 2/3 up, so let's say 60%, whatever. It's not magic here because we can adjust the liquid level over time, but at the very beginning, you need half to 2/3 of that meat mixture covered in there. And then the lid goes on. Now, before the lid goes on, could you throw in a couple of bay leaves because you have them? Yeah, and if you don't worry. And before the lid goes on, I mean, can you add in some more flavor to the braising broth that is now kind of oniony? And again, whether you're using vegetable stock or you can use, as I said, chicken stock, or in the case of brisket, you can certainly use beef stock. You can use half and half. You could use water. Can you add more flavor? And the answer is yes. Number one, I don't use any of those liquids. When I make a brisket, and I confess that I kind of stole. I mean, what's stealing? I mean, I saw the recipe the first time I saw it. It was done by Emeril Lagasse, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting way to make a brisket. And it was with a lot of onions, and it was braised in beer. So if I'm giving you my recipe for my comfort food brisket, once the meat goes back into the onions that have been sweat, I add, a couple of cans of beer, or at least a can. And then if I need more liquid, I could add more beer, which I do. Or at that point, again, you can go, maybe I'll just put in some beef broth, or maybe the other half of my braise will be vegetable stock. It doesn't matter. You're looking for 2/3 liquid. I'm using beer, not just any beer. I prefer to use a beer that looks to me like it's going to have some nice flavor to it. So it's like an amber or a beer that has a little more body to it. Better, I think. And when the beer goes in, and your meat is covered by 2/3, and before that lid goes on, I said you could add some flavor enhancements. So maybe you have around, a couple of sprigs of thyme. Maybe you have some bay leaves you want to put in there, or nothing. But I do actually always add in some tomato product. Well, so what do I mean by tomato product? I mean anything, frankly, that is tomatoey and red, and that starts with, you could add in a can or less than a can of crushed, Italian plum tomatoes, or not crushed, or any version therein. We're basically looking for, like, let's say a half a cup or so of tomato product. You could put in tomato sauce that you buy. Not anything in it other than just tomatoes. But I mean, sometimes I've seen cans of like Hunt's or whatever it is, Contadina. It's just tomatoes that have been blended. So you could use that. You could instead say, I want a little more richness here. I'm going to throw in some tomato paste. So maybe you put in 3 tablespoons of tomato paste. And I'll tell you what I do. Again, every instruction that I'm giving you is both from the general ledger, and then there's my private version. So I'm using beer rather than the other liquids. And now we're going to put in a tomato. So here are my substitutions. I'm using onions instead of mirepoix, either fine. I'm using beer instead of other liquids, either fine. And when it comes to tomato product, if I don't happen to have any tomatoes floating around, if I don't have any tomato sauce floating around, I'll tell you what, a couple of really nice shots of ketchup will do the trick, because it is both tomatoey, it is sweet, it is vinegary. It's got all the ingredients that make for umami. So some ketchup goes in there. And then I'm virtually done, other than I put the lid on. I bring it down to like a simmer. When I say a simmer, I mean you just want to see a little movement in there. And I put the lid on the thing. And I expect it to cook for a couple of hours. Like as in 2. And I could leave it on top of the stove, and that would be fine. Or I could put it in the oven. Now, if I put it in the oven, I just want to make sure that my oven is at a temperature, let's say 325 as an example. But that my oven is at a temperature that it keeps it on that very low simmer. And I check it an hour later, and I check it to make sure that it's cooking. I may want to turn over the actual piece of meat at that point, stir things around a little bit, and certainly check the liquid level, because here is your opportunity to make sure that there is sufficient a liquid in there, versus whether you go, hey, that's an awful lot of liquid, I wouldn't mind cooking that down some more. And the heat over the next hour will help with that. So I guess it's important at this point to go, you don't want the thing to run dry on you. Again, braising is cooking with wet heat. So you have enough of it in there to begin with. You're keeping it on the simmer. The lid is on, and that's all good. And then you're checking an hour into your cooking process, and you look at it and you go, maybe it needs more liquid, maybe it doesn't. I'll turn it over, I'll stir it around, and then I'll let it cook for another hour. And then generally after a couple hours, you got yourself a beautiful, soft, stunningly delicious piece of meat. Take it out at that point. It can sit forever. And when I say forever, I mean you can leave it out for a couple of hours. You can refrigerate it, use it the next day. The meat is now cooked, so we're going to focus on what's left in the pot, which can now be the very texture that you want it to be, right? If you have plenty of liquid in there and you go, that's the kind of gravy that I want, then you leave it at that. If you want to thicken it, a lot of people add stuff to thicken, which is to say, something, floury, for example. I don't do that. This is a beautiful sauce that we've created here with this braise. And all I do is I decide how much liquid I want as kind of gravy. I want enough so that, not only is there plenty on top of the meat, but, I can sop up, I can put some extra gravy on my mashed potatoes, or I can take a nice piece of baguette and, squish it into the soppage, we call it in my family. Get beautiful soppage on the bread from the gravy. And so if you feel like it needs to cook down to get more thick, then you put it over, you're back on top of a flame here, on top of the oven. You let it cook for a little bit until it gets to the texture you want. If you feel like it's good as it is, you're done. If you feel like you want more liquid, add a little bit more liquid in there and stir it around and cook it until it gets to the texture you want. And you, ladies and gentlemen, have brisket, which, as you've heard me say, could be perfectly fine then, that meal, or better the next day. And therein is another one of the beauties of brisket. I always make too much, because the next day, man, that brisket makes an awfully good sandwich, especially with all those kind of onions on them. And if you want to do it the way that Emerald did it, I remember it being very spicy. Now, why? What did he do? Would it be red pepper flakes would kind of make the most sense. Where would you put them in? Very early, like with the onions or with the braising liquid. But anyway, that's besides the point. I am here to tell you about the mechanics of making a brisket, which is done in the technique that we call the braise, which is wet heat. And again, I'm using a lot of onions and a nice piece of meat that's well seasoned. And there, my friends, you have braised brisket of beef. And finally, for this evening, I had mentioned oatmeal. And I mention it because I think there's no middle ground on oatmeal, by which I think, some people love it and some people hate it. I'm an oatmeal lover. But I want you to know up front, not just any oatmeal. I don't use the instant stuff. It's fine if you do. I'm not judgy about it, but it's not as good. I mean, it's not judgy about it, but it's not as good. That's basically what it comes down to. No, if you want to have good oatmeal, you got to go get yourself some steel cut oats. I find the best are from McCann. They come in a big old tin can. They come from Ireland. They've been making them for 100 years. If you can get better oatmeal, do. But the only reason people don't, gravitate to the instant stuff is because we live in a culture of instant gratification, and all you can eat. But if you want to have great oatmeal, it starts with having the best, as always, kind of ingredient. Get yourself some of these steel-cut oats, and cook them according to the directions, which is, I don't know, I think it's like, it's a can of, for every cup of oats that you use like 4 cups of water, or whatever the proportion are. I will tell you from the outset that what makes my oatmeal different is, and you cook that, by the way, that's a 25-minute, cook right there. I think that's why people don't have the patience. But I say, you wake up and, let something simmer for 25 minutes while you get ready for work. At the end, you'd be highly rewarded. So the only thing that I'm saying I do differently is that most people are accustomed to having oatmeal for breakfast in the morning, and they have it with brown sugar's good, and honey is good, maple syrup, whatever you like to sweeten it. Raisins are good, nuts are good, whatever. Berries on top, fabulous. I like that too. But once I turn myself onto the concept of savory oatmeal, my life changed, and I'll tell you why. Because it's so yummy, and it's so gratifying, and it's so great, especially in midwinter. When you wake up and it's cold, and you just want something to kind of fill you. It really does fill you, by the way. I mean, you're going to be good until like 2 p.m. after you have this at 8 a.m, because oatmeal is filling. It's complex carbohydrates. And again, rather than covering it up in sugar, I go the savory route. What do I mean by the savory route? That in addition to salt, I'll put in seasoned salt. In addition to that, I'll put in some olive oil while it's cooking. In addition to that, I might find, what else do I have around the house here that I can put into that Chinese chili crisp. I put in like a couple of hits of that. If I'm not going to, sometimes, and maybe I put in dry mustard before. And then after it, whatever, that's the beauty of it. It is literally a platform for any type of savory flavor that you like. If you happen to like curry powder, curry flavor, go ahead and put curry in there. If you happen to want something that feels like Italian-y, a little pinch of oregano, maybe a little bit of that tomato that we were talking about could go in there. If you want to make it, Korean, what would stop you from putting in gochujang? And the answer is nothing. And then so you go, well, wait a second, this sounds weird, Rob, because oatmeal, breakfast, whatever. But here's the thing. Why is oatmeal any different from rice, any different from, wheat, or corn, right? I mean, in this country, people have grits for breakfast every day. But they also have it, for dinner. Like, it's savory is what the point is. Like, even if grits are plain, you like them when you add, flavored stuff to them. But the point is that it's a grain, right? I mean, whether it's rice or like corn, like polenta. So then, if we can turn corn into polenta, why don't we turn oats into savory oatmeal and have it at any meal? Once the thing has been cooked for 20, for the majority of the time, I'll start considering adding in, some cheese. And then at the very end, there I have a beautiful bowl of steaming hot, super savory oatmeal, which is so good that I could eat it just like that, but I don't have to. Maybe it needs a pinch of salt. Maybe you want to drop a little olive oil on top of it. Maybe it wants a little bit more of whatever, condiment you put inside. Or, stay with me here, a nice sunny side up egg on the top of that, where you open up the yolk and it drizzles down, yellow, beautiful flavor drizzles down over the savory oatmeal. It's my second or third most lovable breakfast, and it's fantastic. It's not complicated. It's good for the midwinter, and frankly, I'm eating it all year long. And so, my friends, we come to the end of another episode of All You Can Eat. I hope that you can appreciate some of the things that we've done today to make life more delicious, which includes oatmeal, savory style, which includes a beautiful brisket. And again, I didn't mention it before, so I'll mention it now. The process that I took you through on the braising and the searing and all that could be applied, as I said, to other proteins, whether it's chicken or, short ribs braised for a couple hours, falling off the bone. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing as well. And then, of course, we started today's session with different soups, whether it's potato leek or pea or lentil, whatever it is. These are easy. They are heartwarming. They are soul satisfying. And that's what the program is about, my friends. It's about deliciousness and about your ability to do it, getting the most taste with the fewest ingredients and the least effort. And I'm your host, Rob Rosenthal. If you are interested in a class and you hear this podcast in time, go to the 92Y or maybe 92 Street. You would think I would know that. Let's look that up right here. 92y.org, is that what it is? Let's see. Still can't find it. Very good. And the answer is go to 92y.org and go to where they offer up continuing education and look in continuing education for the food and cooking classes, and you'll find me in there periodically, like now, because next week I'm going to be doing demoing on camera live exactly what it is that I just took you through now here in audio form only. And the following week I'm talking about, it's actually my most popular class of all time, the 10 most important things that I learned in cooking school. That's on Wednesday the 23rd. That's really good too. So you can sign up, you can stay with me live. The thing that's great about the 92nd Street Y is that if you happen not to be available when the program is running live, on Wednesdays at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, then you can, they'll send you a link to watch it on video after that. So that's cool too. You can find All You Can Eat on iHeartRadio. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Spreaker. I believe your search will be either for All You Can Eat or Rob Rosenthal. You can find me at realrobrosenthal.com. That is realrobrosenthal.com. Hopefully I'll be back here with you soon for episode 123 of All You Can Eat. In the meantime, remember this, my friends, life is short, so never waste a meal.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on